I'm here with another another manuscript I managed to dig up during the time I had off. That's kind of my whole entire point. I took some time to kind of figure out where I wanted to go, and I think I found something really interesting. This one is called Stonecaller, and it is either the prequel or the sequel to Talisman of the Winds. I'm not sure. I won't know until I finish reading it. So there we go. I'm going to do things a little bit differently too. So what I'm going to do is there's natural breaks in the story. So at that point during the breaks, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll take a mini break during the natural breaks in the story, and I will answer them then, because I'm all about engagement. So, without further ado, this is chapter 1 of the Stonecaller. This is me reading a manuscript that I didn't actually write. It's my dad's story. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. So, again, Stonecaller, chapter 1. The sky was bright blue and cloudless, making his wide-brimmed hat critical. Not the kind of country to be crossing alone, Quidrum knew. But he'd worn out his welcome with the caravan 2 days ago. He snarled at that thought. Hadn't they proved he was cheating at gambling? And what if they had? Everybody did. What if they were able? What would have finished it, of course, was the mortar-eaten young fool pulling a knife. So, Quidrum used his own knife to finish the matter. That old bugger of a caravan master had driven him out, as though he were the one at fault. He stabbed his stick viciously into the grassy ground. Well, he could be thankful his talisman against lameness was holding up. When it ceased to hold up, he'd be sticking like an old man, and that rankled him. Medium, tall, smooth-muscled, usually nimble, he seldom had to lack for female company. When his leg went chaos away, though, he turned into a pinch-faced cripple, old before his time. He paused, listening. Yes, he'd heard a sound. Someone over the rise. It had been a shout. And that had to be taken as trouble until proven otherwise. He toiled up the rise. The caravan trail took the easy way around, marked by ox dung and ruts of ox carts. The ox dung varied from being a few days old all the way to rich grassy lumps. Even with the talisman, his leg didn't like this. He was not about to wander around a corner and into something that might be trouble. He was not going to skylight himself coming over the hill either. He crawled the last several feet on his stomach. Better be alive and foolish and feeling foolish than be genuinely foolish and suddenly taken dead for it. When he got to the top of the hill, he saw a situation that seemed abundant with possibilities. There was a tumble of rocks down there, next to a spring. Near the spring was a pack mule, his packs on the ground nearby. In cover, behind scrawny bushes and rocks and the like, were about half a dozen ragged bandits. The merchant, the owner of the mule and the packs? There he was, in the tumble of rocks near the water. He wasn't truly visible himself, just a slight movement, and a bandit behind a bush pitched over with a small arrow in him. The other bandits weren't discouraged either, yet it was still 5-1. No, 6-1. He'd missed the one moving cautiously on his belly. From the looks of it, the merchant wouldn't be around for long. There was another movement, higher in the rocks, and another bandit crumpled. No movement from the first place, though. He must be biding his time. It was impossible for him to have gotten from one place to the other so fast. It also meant Quidrum had to do something soon. No altruism here. Once they finished the merchant, they may as well find Quedrum's tracks, and then they'd be on his butt in the shake of an old woman's apron. He reached into his pouch and pulled out his sling. It was a long while since he'd come happily trotting down from the Arndale Hills, sling in hand, ready to make a living with someone's army. He grimaced at the memories, and again at his leg's sympathetic twinge. He was going to have to skyline himself after all. He could do all right on one knee, but for certain he'd do better standing. He put one of his special white stones in the sling. At these odds, he'd need every advantage. Standing, he whirled the sling 3 times around his head and let go. The stone flew, a black speck through the air, dropping to strike unerringly on the shaggy head of the bandit behind a bush. The man yelled and sprawled out from his cover. The bowman looked up and spotted Quedrum and drew his bow. Quedrum dropped another stone in his sling and whirled it. The arrow dropped in the grass several feet downhill. The bandit wasn't used to shooting at these distances. He was taking another arrow when Quedrum's stone got him. There was another man below the hill on his feet, whirling a sling, which brought back the memory of Quedrum's first battle, under a bright, hot sky, a field of green grass, daisies, and bluebells, with he and the others doing the usual slinger job. A scattered screen across the light infantry's front, harassing the enemy advance. Across the field were another screen of slingers, doing the same job for their side. Your normal target was the people the slingers were screening, if they were close enough, but otherwise you whittled away at the slingers. Of course, he never knew which of the enemy got him. He felt a glancing blow on his left knee, and the leg refused to hold up. A friend had helped him get behind lines. Later that same day, the friend had taken an arrow and died. All this went through his mind in the instant, while he was moving to make himself a poorer target, dropping a stone into his own sling. Then the slinger stone went wild. He fell with an arrow in the back. "Thank you, merchant," he muttered, and then he sent his own stone at another target. He better use his next stones well. He wanted the merchant to feel at least a little bit indebted to him. What remained of the bandits were running. Best not let any get away, in case they developed some courage and came back sneaking later that night. His stones flew as fast as he could make them. He came carefully down the hill. The merchant would be wary. It'd be interesting to find out what was in the mule packs. There was no sign of the merchant until Quedrum got close enough to the spring to smell the fresh water and the scent of the bushes growing by. At first he thought this was a child. Children, especially children no taller than his waist, did not grow thick beards, nor have lined and weather-beaten faces. The man wore a leather tunic and trousers, and a forward-flopping pointed leather cap, all decorated with patterns of stars and flowers and winding stems. He also carried a crossbow. Quedrum had heard of them, but never seen one. They had good range, but were slow to load, giving a poor rate of fire. The little man was smiling broadly, though, and that boded well. "A good day to you, O lame slinger, and my thanks. I shall have to reward you." Quedrum laughed, at least partly in response to having survived a fight. Memories of stories leapt to his mind. Stories old Baksha used to tell, way off in the hills. You rescued a strange-looking person, and he offered you a reward. "I'd like the power to move mountains. I'd like to marry a beautiful princess, and I'd like to live happily ever after. And I'd like you to turn your back for just a moment." The little man's eyes opened in what was clearly feigned surprise. "Ah, the old tales, how lovely! But let me introduce myself. I am Shefa Kalish, a merchant in various gewgaws and trinkets. And you?" "Quedrum, of no particular place." "Ah, Quedrum, the lame slinger. Very pleased to make your acquaintance. If you'll accompany, I'll see to your reward. I shall have to do a bit of hasty traveling to make up for what this ambush has cost me." He turned and began to take a step towards his mule. Quedrum took a step forward, reaching for his dagger. Shefa Kalish turned, as if recalling something he had forgotten to say, Quedrum's leg gave way and he collapsed under it with a grunt of pain. Oh my goodness, has your talisman failed you again? Sorry, has your talisman failed you then? Yes, Quedrum replied through gritted teeth, and it shouldn't have. Among the jobs he had taken, after his leg had healed enough to walk on, was as an apprentice pupil and a general servant for a magician, a crabby old man who barely raised the term hedge wizard. Quedrum had swept the shop, handled some simpler herbs, and learnt of the less complex talismans. It had started with him bartering his assistance for the talisman against lameness, then had worked his way to near apprenticeship, though no specific agreement was ever made. He knew this talisman against lameness, it lasted longer, much longer than this, and it failed bit by bit, not suddenly. Of course, the apprenticeship hadn't lasted. Old Friolec was scant with his pay, and had the nerve to take exception to Quedrum's selling a few handfuls of poppy and the like to make up for it. He looked up at the little man. How did you know I was wearing a talisman? The little man shrugged. I have several ways and means of knowing certain things, oh young and pain-filled slinger. But I think I have something that will help. It will not be counted against your reward, of course. He went rummaging through his mule pack and came back with a small strip of gray ribbon, about a thumb breadth wide and 2 forearms long. Here, wrap this around your leg, either inside or outside the trousers. It will have an immediate effect, though it will take a while for you to be able to move with comfort. He looked around. We will have to camp here tonight. Quedrum wondered about the little man's sanity. He seemed too trusting of someone he'd just met, despite the fact that the person had helped him against the bandits. Then he began to wonder. The talisman had failed at just the right moment, at least from the little man's viewpoint. Had this strange fellow had something to do with it? Now he, Quedrum, had put a talisman the merchant had provided, put it on without thought or for what it might be. A talisman of obedience was possible in theory, though it was beyond Quedrum's competence. One heard of them, never a matter of first-hand knowledge, but regarding some third cousin's best friend who either had a near escape or was taken with one, only escaped by some clever trick. He had discussed with old Friolec some possibilities of various talismans. Some, such as the talisman of instant traveling, were possible in theory, but no one had ever been known to have made one that worked. He reached a hand down furtively toward the knot. He had no trouble touching it, which was a good sign. One thing that went into a talisman of obedience was the charm against taking it off. Well, whatever it was, he'd better be careful for a while, learn what he could, and not make any moves until the right time. Stonecaller busied himself with setting up a meal, dried meat, bread, and watered wine. During all the activity, some general and hypothetical notion, now and then asking his guests for a response, and then carry on as if Quedrum had said yes or no, whichever had been expected. Here we are, O hungering slinger of the deadly aim. It isn't much, but it will do for traveling. The portion he gave to Quedrum was a fair-sized one, which made Quedrum suspicious straight off. People always had a motive for the generosity. What did this little fellow want? Well, he wasn't going to ask. Let the little fellow bring it up first and see if it were something he'd want to try. If it were, he'd make the little merchant pay more than a meal's worth. He had to keep in mind that there was more to Stonecaller than volubility. He'd been doing a fair job of holding off the bandits, so there was no doubt Quedrum's arrival had helped. Nor was he willing to believe that his talisman had up and failed on its own just like that. Just as he was making his move. Caution was a good notion, at least for a while. It was hard to equate the chided little fellow with some serious danger. The wine Stonecaller shared was nowhere near the sour stuff commonly taken on journeys, and somehow or other it didn't taste as if it had been brought any distance on the back of a plodding mule, stirring up all the sediment on the bottom. This, added to all the other things he had witnessed and experienced about the little man, kept Quadrum alert for the trap. When the meal was over and everything packed up, Stonecaller spoke, in the manner of one getting down to a subject that had been put off for too long. Now, about your reward for assisting me. You've asked something which may take a little time to arrange. No, there's no need to speak. I ought to be ready to wave a hand and have your 3 wishes come true. I, however, am not so gifted as that. We can make a start, though. Reach into your pouch and bring out one of your special stones. Quadrum was reaching into his pouch when he stopped. How do you come to know about my special stones? There were certain stones he'd learned as a child were smooth white oval stones, and not even every smooth white oval stone with which he could hit small targets at amazing distances. He recognized them by feel, and after he found they didn't work for others and only got him teased, he stopped talking about them. He never stopped using them, though. Stonecaller merely smiled. I know a number of bits of lore and story, O suspicious slinger. This and that, here and there. Suffice it for the moment, I am aware of your stones. Now, take one out and let it lie on your palm. Examine it carefully. Hold it in your mind. Every crack and discoloration, every slight difference to its shape. Imagine even that you are seeing inside it. Everything about it is in your mind. Its particular weight, the shape given to the stone alone. Now, tell it to jump. Go on, tell it. It wasn't as if the little man had given him order he had to obey, more that the quiet voice had put his mind in such a state that doing what he was told seemed the only right and natural thing to do. Jump, Stone, he told it, Jump, Stone, he told it almost quietly. The stone leaped perhaps a finger breadth, and Quadrum swore. Old woman's apron, how did you do that? I did nothing. Oh, believing young slinger, only convinced you that you could. Consider, if you would, why you would consider these stones special. You can do things with them that no other can. So it stands to reason you can do other things with them. And ask yourself, what is a mountain made of? Stone, of course. But you will argue and argue in the face of the evidence of your eyes. Yet I assure you, if you start with the ability to move certain stones, you will find, with practice, to be able to move other stones, and at some point you will need to find yourself capable of moving mountains. Why one would wish to move mountains is a thing that escapes me at the moment. No doubt you have your reasons, and they are good ones. Nonsense! I'm no magician. All I can manage are a few simple talismans. You did this! Stonecaller sighed and shook his head. Oh, lame and doubting slinger, make this test. Hold the stone again in your hand, and when you are ready, make it move. I will turn my back. You do everything as you did before, and when you are ready, call on it to jump. If it does so when I am not looking, you can hardly blame it on me. Quadrum glowered. There was something going on here, something he didn't understand. He took up the stone again, looked at Stonecaller, who smiled and turned his back as he promised. Jump, stone. He thought it wiggled, though his hand was shaking. Not so easy, oh hasty young Quadrum. You must meditate on it first. Look at it carefully. Make yourself fully aware of it. Old woman's apron, he muttered, but went through what he could remember of the process, focusing on what the stone looked like in the flickering light of the fire. Jump, stone. It leaped in his hand. Perhaps not so far as the first time, but it had definitely moved. This time he didn't drop it, just stared at it. There was something to what the little man had told him. He could hit difficult targets at incredible distances with these sorts of stone. Could he command them to do more? What else might he do with them? May I look now? Asked Stonecaller. Yes, you might as well. So it moved? It did. Did you put some sort of spell on it? Tisk. such a doubtful and distrustful nature. It will do no good, of course, for me to assure you that I have done nothing to the stone, only give you a lesson. The work is all yours, the ability is all yours, one with which you were born, but might never have used for more than hitting possible targets. Try it again from time to time with that stone and with others. Perhaps no more tonight. It is a thing like using of new muscles. It will take time to develop. But the more you do it, the better you'll get. Eventually you will not need to speak, merely think what you want the stone to do. Quadrum, still not quite accepting the notion that he could move stones with the word, returned the stone to his pouch. Yes, he was going to have to keep an eye on this little fellow. Shapakalish smiled at him. It grows late, and we ought to be sleeping soon. But do me a favor. Tell me one of those tales they tell in your homeland. Tales? What was this now? What was he up to? Yes, tales. I collect stories, epics, romances, even philosophical discourses. What sort of tales do they tell in the winter nights in your homeland? Tales of my homeland? Why, yes, for certain. Don't worry. Even if you tell it badly, I will still be interested. Quadrum clenched his teeth. People might say all kinds of nasty things about him, but no one had ever said he couldn't tell a story. I'll tell you a story about North Wind Woman. You ever hear any of her stories? Shapakalish considered. I think not. Go ahead. So, here it is. North Wind Woman went out one day, walking to town to buy a fat pig. She had her hair all bound up on her head, fastened with 2 long pins. As she walked along, up came Rock Monster. Rock Monster said, I'm going to eat you, North Wind Woman. Pressing me is not good, said North Wind Woman. She shook down her hair, and a little fire came dancing along and burned Rock Monster's butt. So Rock Monster ran away yelling, and North Wind Woman continued on her way. But Rock Monster went and talked to his friend Swamp Monster. I found North Wind Woman alone, but she drove me away with fire. Ha! You don't know what you're doing. Come along with me. The 2 of us will be too much for her. So Rock Monster and Swamp Monster went and found North Wind Woman. We're going to eat you, North Wind Woman, said the Swamp Monster. Pressing me twice as bad, said North Wind Woman, and she shook down her hair. So 2 fires came dancing along and burned Rock Monster and Swamp Monster on the butts, so they ran away yelling. And North Wind Woman continued on her way to town. But Rock Monster and Swamp Monster found Deep Earth Monster and talked to him. We found North Wind Woman alone, but she drove us away with fire. Ha! You 2 don't know what you're doing. Come along with me. The 3 of us will be too much for her. So they found North Wind Woman as she was walking along. And Deep Earth Monster said, We're going to eat you, North Wind Woman. But North Wind Woman said, Pressing me 3 times is too many. She shook down her hair, and fire came raging and burnt up Rock Monster, Swamp Monster, and Deep Earth Monster. And North Wind Woman went on her way to town to buy a pig. So they tell the tale. Quadrum looked at Shapakalish. He'd even finished the tale with the traditional phrase, so they tell the tale. He wondered if the little man knew that tradition or recognized it at all. Shapakalish considered for a time. No, I hadn't heard that one. Very interesting. A very forbearing and formidable woman. That's the story they tell. I think it's a bit stupid myself. The merchant's eyebrows rose. Indeed? Why would you say that? Because she ought not to allow them so many chances. If she burnt up Rock Monster the first time around, she wouldn't have been bothered again. Shapakalish chuckled. But then there'd been no story, would there? Chaos away with the story. That's the way the world works. People who have power use it, and don't worry too much about anybody else. Tisk, tisk, so bitter indeed, oh young slinger. Suppose I tell you a tale to make you smile. Oh? Yes, I need a smile. Go ahead, tell your story. Indeed I will. You see, it happened there was a man in a far-off kingdom. He is not an extremely bad man, but it chanced he offended the king 3 times. After the 3rd time, he was brought before the presence of the king, who sentenced him to death. The man at once cast himself to the ground before the king and said, "O king, most mighty and powerful king, if you will allow me to live for 1 year, I will teach your favorite horse to sing hymns to the gods." This intrigued the king so much that he set the sentence aside and said, "You'll be given 1 year. In that time, if you have not taught my horse to sing, you will die." "Agreed, O mighty and merciful king." As he was walking out of the presence of the king, one of his friends approached him and said, "This is madness. In a year you'll be executed." But the man smiled. "In a year many things will happen. The king may die, the horse may die, I may die, or perhaps the horse will learn to sing." Quedrim could hardly avoid a smile. And that's the way of it. Another day is another day. And that's the way of power, too. Kings, nobles, caravan masters, they use their powers as they see fit, and the rest of us must go along with it and stay out of their notice. Oh dear, most cynical slinger. If someone does you good, you will be looking forever around to see, and about to see just what might be the trick. Of course, don't go telling me that anyone does anything for anyone without expecting something in return. I watch out for myself because no one else will. Dawn woke him. He couldn't recall anything after the argument over the little man's tail. Had something put him to sleep? A blanket covered him, a thin one, but warm enough for all that. He moved his hands and feet, but the little merchant had not bound him during the night when he was so sound asleep. That hadn't really allayed any of Quedrim's doubts. Stonecaller might be being paid to deliver him, and it was easier to convince him to walk somewhere. Walking on his leg wasn't going to be easy just yet. "Aha!" said the cheery voice rang out. "He is awake. Good. We will eat a bite then we will travel." "We? I don't think my leg will allow me to go anywhere much today." "Oh, I think you will not find matters as terrible as all that. Here, have some bread. Have you slept well?" "Very well," he said, his suspicions coming back. The little man held up a small but strong-looking hand, waving as if warding something off. "No, nothing I did, or at the least, nothing. My part in it was minor, teaching you the trick with the stone. I said it would tire you, and it did. You may or may not know that the pain itself can be wearying, and you are in some pain." "Oh, of course. After you fell asleep, I put a blanket over you to keep the cold from waking you. Now, eat." So they ate. Quedrim discovered that, other than a few twinges now and then, his leg was in fact much better. While Quedrim was still eating, Stonecaller went over to the mule and began talking to the animal. "Now," he said, "we come to this part of the day. Yes, indeed, it is time to put on your pack for traveling. Come now, what will the guests think of us if you refuse to take your part? Of course he looks rough and rustic, but has there never been such a man that hid underneath such an exterior the soul of a philosopher? And indeed, he knows as well as you and I know that the nature of beasts is to be servants of men. And you thus will go against nature and against all the philosophies of the wise? For surely they are wiser than you or I, and thus they do declare. Some will even declare that for a recalculent beast such as yourself, it may be necessary to take up a philosophical stick and whack you on the backside. Yes, now that is better." Had he not known better, Quedrim would have said he was a harmless, fussy little man. With the mule finally resigned to his lot, Stonecaller was back beside Quedrim. "Well, young Quedrim, do you need a hand getting to your feet?" The thought of someone who barely stood waist high on him, giving him a hand to his feet, brought an expression of scorn to Quedrum's face. I think I should be able to manage. His leg, however, seemed determined to tweak him at strange times. Movements, which usually had no effect, were suddenly sending stabbing pain through his knee. Getting up was not a simple process, and by the time he was on his feet, he was aware of a pinched feeling in his face as he gritted his teeth. Morning is always the worst, said Shapakalish cheerfully. Why shouldn't he be cheerful? It wasn't him that had having iron spikes driven through his knee. I hope you're not expecting me to travel at any speed. I think I'll be doing well to make it from here to the main track. Oh, you'll do quite well. After a bit, your knee will stop hurting altogether. And besides, I do not use the main track anyway. So what do? Fly? Oh no, I use the hidden ways. Now, take a step. He took hold of Quedrum's arm as though to help him along and took a step. They stood in a deep wood, tall evergreens on every side. If it was an illusion, it was a very good one, for the scent was not only of evergreens, but of the woodland growth as well. Startled, Quedrum put a foot wrong and gasped as his knee let him down. Careful, warned Shapakalish. Oh yes, I'm very careful. What is this? A stop on the hidden ways, as I said. Now we'll have to take another step. Are you ready? Not that it would have mattered at all if he weren't ready. The little man took his sleeve again and took another step. Quedrum, without having taken a step on his own, was standing beside him on the edge of a huge lake. Out on the lake, large serpent-like things were swimming, apparently playing, for they leapt out of the water and dived, going over and under each other. Best not stand here too long. Come along. Now they were on a cold, snowy plain, whiteness stretching out on all sides as far as they could see. Shapakalish stepped again, and now they were on a green plain, and only a score of yards away was a large skeleton. It had large wings, and the bones of the wings lay extended on each side of the body. The skeleton was easily as long as 20 men, and the skull itself was as tall as a man. All around the skeleton, nothing grew. No blade of grass, no smallest weed, a patch of dead soil. The vaguely shape of the skeleton itself, wings and all, held the bones. Beyond that border, the field is green. Quedrum looked down at Shapakalish, who looked back at him. There are strange things, even dangerous things in the hidden ways. But I only stop to investigate on occasion, when I have no important schedule to keep. And you have a schedule to keep now? Yes, one more step, please. They were in a grassy meadow on a mountain pass, running water next to them, and small bushes growing here and there. We'll camp here for the evening. Where are we? On the border of Higfrod. Higfrod, but that's a fair distance from where we started. An advantage of traveling the hidden ways. The folk in this land, for the most part, speak the common language. You may find you like the place. But if you could just step into the hidden trails, or whatever you called them, Quedrum asked mistrustfully, what was that business of standing off with the bandits back then? I had to wait for you. Quedrum's hand went for his knife. For me? Why? I don't even know you. Shapakalish waved a calming hand. No, I have no nefarious purpose in mind. I promise. By the Lady of Praises, I mean you no harm to you. Which might have calmed Quedrum's mind had he not had experience with people and promises. Consider the facts, said the little man. Had I wanted you dead, I could have killed you while you slept last night. Does that not suggest that I mean no harm to you? Or that you plan to deliver me somewhere alive for someone else? Oh, suspicious young slinger. Have you made some enemy who would go to such trouble over you? A man like me makes enemies, and sometimes I haven't been able to make sure that they were safely dead when I left. And which of these alive and unsafe foes might be up to such a complicated scheme as you suggest? Quedrum had to admit, though he wouldn't do so aloud, that no enemy he could think of could afford the cost of such a scheme. A man of his standing rarely numbered rich merchants among those who actively wished him unwell. One heard other things, not necessarily connected with the enmity of magicians wanting live people to test spells on, or to supply certain organs or bodily parts for casting for special spells or talismans. Come now, O slinger of magnificent suspicions, I've already sworn I mean you no harm. Ease the grip on your knife. All right then. He eased the grip on his knife. He was not, however, easing the grip on his suspicions. He continued watching, without seeming to, for any untoward motion. He had not altogether given up on the thought of killing the little man for his mule and goods. That, however, was the thing he would have to give much more thought to, since this fellow was more than he looked. But aside from the great assurances that you mean me no harm, why were you waiting for me then? Oh, it was a simple matter of seeing if you were the person I looked for, and making sure of that. Giving you a few hints, and letting you go on your way. And you do this without asking me for pay? Why, of course. There are some things to be done, and you are the most likely man to do them. And no, I will not tell you what these things are, for that will make you more determined not to do them. Now, would you mind looking around for some firewood? I suggest you use care. This would seem to be a safe neighborhood, though no one knows. No one does he? Quedrum tested his knee. It hurt a bit, though not as badly as to be disabling. Yes, I think I can handle firewood. One suspicious part of Quedrum's mind suggested to him that taking part in the camp chores was meant to make him feel one of the party, inasmuch as two could make up a party. He would have to take care just how much he allowed himself to accept that. When he had gotten out of the little man's sight, a notion took him. Reaching into his pouch, he took out one of his special stones. As he had done the previous night, in the firelight, he concentrated on it, every aspect of it. Then he said, "Jump, stone." The stone leaped in his hand. He stood there looking at it for a moment. So, either the little man had some means of keeping track of just what he, Quedrum, was doing, or he had put a spell on all of Quedrum's stones, or else he, Quedrum, was doing this all by himself. The simplest answer was that he was doing it himself, which was too much strangeness for him. He shrugged and went back to collecting wood. That evening after supper, Stonecaller said, "I fear I may have taken you somewhat off your intended route. You had pressing business back there, had you?" "If I said yes, would you retrace our steps tomorrow?" Stonecaller smiled broadly. "If you said so, young Quedrum, I would have to inform you that you are fibbing most wickedly." "So you have a talisman of truth-telling, do you?" What things might I have told him that weren't true?" The little man raised his bushy eyebrows. "Ah, and are you familiar with such, O young slinger of the grim mood?" "Not really. I know they exist. Old Freylock did mention them, but slightly. Said no one but could talk about himself without adjusting the facts a little bit. So if a person had a talisman of truth-telling, all you'd find out was that everyone were liars. Myself, I think he said that because that kind of talisman was beyond his ability and he knew it." "Oh ho! So you are greatly learned in the art of making talismans?" Quedrum felt himself blush. "No, not greatly learned. I served as an apprentice to a magician, a bare hedge wizard, whose main living was love talismans, and those an uneven quality. I learned how to do simple things before he and I came to the parting of ways." He was a little uneasy that the man might pick up on that parting of ways and ask our awkward questions, but he did not. Oh, so you're a man of many skills then. I can do a lot of things, some of them better than others. He heard a defensive tone in his voice and hated it. He liked to make the most of his achievements, but Shopakalish had already hinted that he could tell the truth from lies. Bragging to acquaintances was one thing. Bragging to a stranger who recognized it for what it was, that was another. It was almost as if Shopakalish had read his mind. He held up a hand in a warning gesture. No, I was not trying to bait you, merely making an observation that you have several talents, the better to make your way in a harsh world. Which only annoyed Quedrum the more. And you know all about this harsh world, don't you? A merchant such as yourself, with your ability to slip about from here to there unnoticed? Bushy eyebrows rose again. Oh, I have my little advantages, it's true, but everything is not for free, and it was certainly a harsh lesson in life for those bandits. And consider this, if I could always slip away from trouble, what need would I have of my skill with a crossbow? Which was a matter worthy of thought. Shopakalish went on, with the slightest of pauses. We are, however, straying from somewhat further from my original question, and the direction of my thought was taking. I plan to go to the city of Higfrod. Of course, Higfrod is not so much of a city as a very large town. I think, though, I can sell a bit of this and that there. If you'd like to accompany me, you're welcome. I'm not a merchant. Of course not, nor have I thought of you as an apprentice or a workman. I merely thought you might be willing to accompany me to the town. Of course, if you wish to hire yourself out as my assistant... No, I don't think that will be necessary, Shopakalish smiled, as if he had just brought a business deal to a very satisfactory close. Just remember, I have to see to the remaining portions of your reward. But don't forget to practice with your stones. In fact, I think you ought to do a little bit of practice before you go to bed. Quedrum shot him a suspicious look. You do you? He thought. He dug one of the stones out of his pouch. After looking at it for a bit, he said, Jump onto my knee, stone. The stone obediently hopped off his hand and landed not quite on his knee, but close. Quedrum looked up at Shopakalish. No, I know you don't believe me, but it is really you who are doing it. Quedrum continued to look at him with mistrust. Oh dear, how young and suspicious we are. Look, I will turn my back, put my fingers in my ears, and you can give it another command and see what happens. He turned and put his fingers in his ears. Quedrum, curious now, looked at the stone and said, Roll to my thigh, stone. The stone obediently moved towards his thigh, stopped only after palm width. He was still sitting looking at it when Shopakalish spoke. May I look again? What? Oh, yes, of course. And did it work? Not completely, but it did seem to try. Ah, yes. Be sure, though, that after sufficient practice, it will do just as you say. After all, you do use those special stones to great effect in your sling, do you not? Quedrum didn't answer. This little man seemed to know altogether too much about him for comfort. He had now set aside any notion of his trying to kill the little man for his mule and goods. He would now settle for getting away from Shopakalish safely. Shopakalish smiled his vexing smile. I assure you, if you continue to practice, there will come a time when you'll be able to make any stone of any size obey you. And I refer to any stone whatsoever, not merely the ones you call special. Quedrum considered the thought of hurling stones as though they were pebbles. What might he be able to do with such power? He might, at the very least, win bets on his ability to lift heavy stones. How much might he win by being able to lift a stone without touching it? I see by your face that you're attracted to the notion, Shopakalish said. Shopakalish looked a little sad. However, I suspect I would not care to hear some of your speculations. If I thought it would do the least good, I would lecture on careful consideration of the use to which you put this power. Or you'll take it away? Shapakilis shook his head. No, I doubt I could. Whatever I might desire. But think of this. A lion can be fierce and powerful, easily a match for one man. But if the lion becomes too troublesome, several men band together to kill him. Is that some sort of threat? No, not at all. Merely a prediction of what may happen if certain circumstances arise. But there is still time. You can move a pebble, but it will require more practice to move the pebble exactly as you wish. It will require still more for you to do serious harm with a stone, other than using it in your sling, of course. Quaidrum was set to thinking. He'd known of wizards who had been suspected of selling curses, usually hedge wizards, with little ability to begin with. Mobs had gathered, though, and in many cases torn them to shreds. He knew that too much ability in gambling, not necessarily cheating, though everyone did it, could result in some poor loser going after you with a dagger. If that loser felt himself being outclassed, he might have gathered several friends. Yes, you'd have to think things through carefully before you start taking people's money. But this business with my stones, are you hinting that I already had power over stones? Power over stones would be putting it a bit strongly. You had some power over certain stones, though scarcely developed to any degree. After all, your range and accuracy with these stones in your sling was something that you hardly took thought over. You would have gone on with that capacity unchanged forever. And you used some spell on me? Oh, ever suspicious one. No, I merely called your attention to your ability, suggested to you how to train it, which means that the first part of your reward was dreadfully easy to supply. I see. Quaidrum had thought his knee didn't hurt so much anymore, and it was possible that tonight he might be able to put a knife in the little man and relieve him of his goods. He put that thought away from him. At times, Shapakilis seemed too eerily close to being able to read Quaidrum's mind. Much better to wait and find some other easier prey. Best not to think of Shapakilis at all, and to think of what sort of game might make of the ability to move and play stones. He woke up next morning with the same thin but warm blanket over him, and in the background Shapakilis' voice cajoling and threatening the mule to allow himself to be loaded with packs. Some beasts, you understand, do not have such accommodating masters. Some would not put up with such fractious and dilatory attitudes. Some would indeed have already taken to the practice of carrying around a big stick with which to chastise animals who seem to not know their places in the world. Yes, that's better. And yes, indeed, I shall want to be sure the cinch is tight, so don't be swelling your belly with air like that. Quaidrum was annoyed, to say the least. He'd slept the night through, missing any opportunity he might have had to rob the little merchant. The worst of it was that he slept so soundly that Shapakilis might have put a knife in him. He was suspicious, and more than suspicious, that there might have been magic involved. A sleep spell on the blanket, for instance, which the little man had tossed over him while he slept. He got up and pulled off the blanket, He considered leaving it in a wadded lump, but decided not to. Let the little fellow think he didn't suspect anything. Let him begin thinking of Quaidrum as harmless. He folded the blanket neatly. I thought we might just eat as we went, Shapakilis said. We could be in Higfrod by noon. Wouldn't it be faster to use your hidden ways? Why, certainly, but it would be a waste. Consider. We appear out of thin air in the market, and cause such a great suspicion among people that we can hardly do anything. How can anyone trust a merchant who is able to appear, as it is assumed, disappear at will? So we need to pick a place that is definitely uninhabited, meaning outside the walls at any rate, and walk from there. So using the hidden ways to move such a short distance would be on the order of lifting a boulder the size of a house in order to crack a walnut. Quidrum nodded. Not that he agreed completely. His knee was still not easy, and he disliked the thought of walking. It was Shapakalish's choice whether or not to use the hidden ways, and there was no way Quidrum could compel the merchant. And that is the first chapter. So I hope you enjoyed it. That was, as always, this first one. I think they have a tendency to be a little bit larger. Yeah, and thank you for joining me. I'm not really sure where this is going to go. I make no guarantees that it is a good story. As far as I know, it's close to a first draft, but I hope you enjoyed the first chapter. I'll be back tomorrow with the next chapter. So I'll talk to you then. Have a good night.